Okay. We are already recording, so welcome everybody. And it looks like the sound's working, so we are good to go.
Okay. I'll call this meeting to order. And the first item is to approve the minutes. Do the motion to approve the minutes. Anybody second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Oh yeah, and then the next thing is a second motion to suspend our typical rules for public engagement to allow a community member to speak at a later time at around 6:45, 7. Yeah, so Heather, you'll be watching for public participants joining and you'll notify us. So if that's okay with you guys, anybody second the motion? All right. Thank you. All right, so let's go with public participation.
Right after the meeting protocols.
Always forget those.
No worries. 1 minute. Welcome, everybody. My name is Heather Sandina, and I'm serving as the technical host for tonight's meeting. Thank you for your grace and patience as we adjust to this new platform of being back in person. We're all learning, and we appreciate your understanding with any technical issues that may pop up today. The city has engaged with community members to co-create a vision for productive, meaningful, and inclusive civic conversations. The vision supports physical and emotional safety for community members, staff, and board commission members, as well as democracy for people of all ages, identities, lived experiences, and political perspectives. For more information about this vision and the community engagement process, please visit that website, bouldercolorado.gov/services/productive-atmospheres. The following are examples of rules of decorum found in the Boulder Revised Code and other guidelines that support this vision. These will be upheld during this meeting. All remarks and testimony shall be limited to matters related to city business. No participant shall make threats or use other forms of intimidation against any person. Obscenity, racial epithets, and other speech and behavior that disrupts or otherwise impedes the ability to conduct this meeting are prohibited. Participants are required to sign up to speak by using the name they are commonly known by, and individuals must display their whole name before being allowed to speak online. Currently, only audio testimony is permitted online. Because we do not have registration for open and public comment tonight, you can indicate you would like to participate by using the raise hand function. Excuse me. The raise hand button is in the participant box, which can be found in the menu by hovering over the top or the bottom of your screen and then clicking on the participant icon. When the box opens, you will see the raise hand button at the bottom. By clicking that button, you can indicate you would like to participate in open or public comment. If you've joined us by phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand. On to your public comment. Some of these things, so it stops freezing the computer. There we go. All right, so it looks like we have a city employee who's previously communicated that she is just listening in. So we do not have any public participants at the moment. But I will keep an eye on that and let you know if we have other people.
Sounds good. All right, then let's move on to the next item, which is the construction talk. Go ahead.
I can tee this up just really quickly, if you don't mind, Emily. Good evening, board members, Jonathan Cohen with Climate Initiatives. So tonight we're kind of doing all things zero waste. It's going to be a good conversation. Really excited to have some of our expert staff here to talk about some of these kind of intertwined issues. The first one, and I'll let Emily introduce herself and talk about this particular topic, but the first one is around our sustainable deconstruction requirements that went into effect in 2020. You're probably going to say some of this, so I apologize for the repetition. As part of our energy conservation code, I know that sounds like a little bit of a mismatch, but we're starting to become a lot more sophisticated in how we utilize our code, both our energy code and kind of our package or suite of codes to achieve the outcomes that we want. So right now, as you know, council is taking a look at our existing energy code update. They'll take that up in Q1 of next year. And then a big project for 2024 is looking at our building codes and thinking about embodied carbon and how we could think about really driving kind of carbon out of our existing structures and that supply chain using our code requirements. And so I guess the point that I would just want to make sure that I make before I turn this over to Emily is that deconstruction of our buildings is a really, really critical piece of our overall zero waste process and our master plan for waste reduction. Obviously, when we're talking about deconstruction of buildings, we're talking about huge quantities of material. So any progress in keeping those materials out of landfills is pretty significant in terms of kind of helping us achieve our goals more broadly. So excited to have Emily take it from here, kick off this presentation, and look forward to any questions you have.
Right. I think we're gonna. I'll just give you. I'll talk until that comes up. So I'm Emily Freeman. I am a policy advisor on the circular economy team, which is Jamie's team. So I am really happy to be here and talk to you about deconstruction. I think just in general, there's not been a lot of like emphasis been put on the built environment in terms of management of waste. When we're looking at buildings historically, they, you know, starting with the urban renewal that started occurring in the 1930s and forward, it really became like, I don't know, it's like, oh, sorry, I'm like not looking on the entire word, but like I'm having like a word like, all right, anyways, it's like everybody, like, you want to go to a demolition, you want to see that big implosion.
Glorification of-
Yes, thank you. I can't, it was just a simple word that I couldn't come up with. Yeah, everyone glorifies demolition, like whether it's my 3.5-year-old who has like, I just want to bulldoze everything and build these towers and knock them down. Literally the books that we read at night are all about bulldozers and graders, and it's a fascination that I think we have built into our culture, whether it's from a very young age or even through adulthood. And I imagine looking at these implosions like on the strip in Las Vegas and people are just gathered around and it's televised. When those materials are gone, they are in the landfill. If they are demolished, whether it's through implosion or other mechanical means, you cannot save that valuable material. It is now lost for really all of eternity. And that's stuff that I think everyone here in this room is fully aware of. So I just kind of like, we're going to try and provide a little bit of that context as to why we care and kind of take you into what the ordinance is and kind of where we're looking and hoping for some guidance around where we want to go. So I've been working on the deconstruction ordinance since I joined the city in February of 2020. Taylor Ryman is moved over from the city manager's office in September. I don't know, September, like, so she joined. Our team is going to be taking over some of the programmatic elements. And Antonia, who you met earlier before the meeting, she has been working really diligently on the administrative tasks, which we'll cover a little bit. So just want to acknowledge our team, and we can't really do it without everyone. So today in our agenda, we've kind of got 3 areas for us to consider. We have we're going to kind of talk about the current code as it is, the 2020 code, what it looked like for implementation, what those current requirements are. Now, and then we're going to transition to talking about what that engagement is what we have done with the contractors and the outreach to the community. We are hosting a deconstruction and working group, and we'll kind of dive into that. And then Taylor is running our ordinance through the racial equity instrument and what our plans are for the data. And that's gonna all go into where do we want to go? What does that future planning look like? The successes coming out of the deconstruction of the old Boulder Community Hospital and what we want to address going forward. So. Slide. All right, so the state of demolition. Why do we care? I've gotten to that a little bit at the start, but as you can see, some of these stats, 1 in 7 buildings in that 30-year time span were demolished. So out of those buildings that are going up, you know, one of those, each of those 17 are now gone, and we will never see those again. Another way to think about this is we always talk about MSW, municipal solid waste. That's what's going out in our normal trash bins. C&D, construction and demolition debris, accounts for more than double of the total waste stream that we're seeing on a municipal level. So out of that entire waste stream, these are stats coming from the EPA, 40% of the entire waste stream, including industrial, C&D, and residential sources, 40% is coming from C&D. Of that amount, of that 600 million tons that's generated every year, 90% is from demolition. So when you're thinking about where that generation of material is it on the construction side? It really is from the demolition. It's the entire mass of that building that is coming down, that is then being lost. So this is why we care about this. Another way that we kind of talk about this is if you think of like a typical residential house, let's just say a 1,700 square foot single family home. If you were to put that home and demolish it and it all goes into the landfill, that is the equivalent of one person's lifetime generated amount of trash. And that demolition happens in about 2 days. And it's just like, I'm trying to like get you to think of like every week you put out I put out 1 bag for 3 people, but we try hard.
Way to brag.
I know, but we look at my neighbor and it's like overflowing out of their 96-gallon cart. So you just think of what those impacts are, and it really is incredible. So we have a picture there just showing the traditional demolition of a building and all of that just getting scraped away and lost forever.
I have a question.
Yes.
What is the difference between waste stream and municipal solid waste?
So the waste stream is like everything. When we're talking about the municipal solid, so municipal solid waste would be like household generated trash. And the 40% of the total waste stream, we're talking MSW, that municipal or the residential trash plus buildings plus any other industrial waste. So if you kind of look at it, the pie chart, 40% would be coming from buildings.
Okay, thank you.
Heather, I'm just verifying. We're looking at the slides because it's probably not working on the Zoom. Is that right?
It's working. Zoom has flipped my displays. So the one that is being displayed to the public is the actual slideshow presentation,
Okay.
and we're seeing the presenter mode.
Okay. Just verify.
So I hope
But you get a preview of what's coming.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you have any other, we're just talking the environmental impact right now. There's a lot of other impacts that go around that. So kind of, we can go to the next slide. That next level of impact is when we're talking deconstruction, it's not just saving the materials that we just talked about. And we'll have the numbers to kind of show you what Boulder has achieved since ordinance implementation. But this is also a way for us to see how we can kind of flip that script, that this is a new way to do business. It creates jobs, It is creating a trained workforce in an area where you might not have known what to do. Deconstruction is, we define deconstruction as the careful dismantling of a home, typically in the opposite order in which a home is constructed. So if you think about what's the last thing to go on the home? The roof. And then the first thing that they're putting down is the foundation. So the first thing that comes off in the deconstruction is the roof and all the support beams, and you're working your way back down to the foundation. It requires skilled labor. On a demolition, you can operate a 2 to 3 person crew. You can remove the entire house and the foundation in a day and a half to 2 days. In a deconstruction of a similarly sized residential home, it would take anywhere from 10 to 14 days, and it's about, I think they say like around 6 to 8 person per crew, depending on what that is. So we do talk about, there are additional costs to being able to deconstruct the home, but there's also additional benefits that when you come to looking at job creation, stability, and being able to see value in those materials as well. So do you want me to kind of talk through the slide? I know. Are you good? Okay, I just want to make sure we're all, I was like, I think it's pretty self-evident. I'm just trying to like talk around that topic. So yeah, it does take that more time and effort. The way that it kind of is that systems change is that you can, if you're donating materials out of a residential home, you get about a 30% of the fair market value. If you're taking that to a nonprofit organization such as Resource Central, which we're lucky enough to have in our community. When you're able to donate those materials to existing nonprofits, it doesn't have to just be Resource, or you're able to sell materials coming out of the home, which some of our contractors are starting to do as well. The homeowner, or really the property owner, is able to make up at least a portion of that additional cost in deconstruction. There are also cases when they can actually make money on a deconstruction. So if you want more information on that, we can kind of get into that eventually. I just wanted to lay that out for you guys as well. Ways to offset, not always, depending on the condition of the home. But yeah, all right, next slide. So when we started this back in 2019, there was Green Points existed before this. It required 65% diversion, not including the foundation of the home. And there really was no teeth around that prior ordinance. We weren't getting any reporting. We didn't have any data. So we really kind of went into the July 1st, 2020 implementation of this ordinance blind, not knowing, is this even possible? Do we have the markets and what would be achievable? So we used that first year as kind of a test case to really understand and really work with those contractors. And we were able to really see that it is possible, that we were achieving the numbers that we expected to see. And we also did a nexus study to confirm that the cost of our deposit was accurate. The $1, well, I guess the $1 per square foot is justifiable to cover environmental costs. There is room to increase that deposit. But as you'll see in the presentation, one of the strategies I would like to focus on is how can we use policy and kind of more descriptive language as to what our expectations are versus any additional financial penalties or fines related to that. So I'm trying to craft the ordinance in that direction. We can go to the next slide. So where are we at? we really want to move us to focusing on that built environment. And this picture, one of let you know, this is the inside of the old Boulder Community Hospital. This was the actual deconstruction work that came out of our city project. So you'll see piles of insulation, you'll see piles of ceiling tiles that are going to be reused. What you can't see that is off to the left is a pile of doors and cabinets that were also just from that same work area. So we're able to take this to heart and do this ourselves as well. So the current ordinance covers all residential and commercial full structure removals. We're really careful not to say demolition. It is anything that is being fully removed or major renovations, what we call level 4 alterations. It's basically a gut job. If you're gonna take all the windows, plumbing, electrical, walls out, etc. We require the contractor to submit a sustainable deconstruction plan to say, identify what types of materials they expect and what they believe the weights are going to be. That is a stumbling block. And something we're looking to maybe not require of the weight estimation piece might not be required moving forward. The goal is to divert 75% by weight of all materials from the landfill with a minimum of 3 materials being diverted. Right now, as I said, with that Nexus study, it's a $1 per square foot deposit with a $1,500 minimum. It is the entire goal of this is we want to give that deposit back. We want to see that the building is diverted. We don't want to use this as like a revenue generating mechanism. So
What is the material, like insulation, drywall,
yeah.
cabinets?
Let's go to the next slide. So we're kind of getting to your point there, so I didn't. What do we know can be recycled at this point in Colorado's market? And this is pretty much true across all areas, whether you're in a mountain or rural community, but also here in Boulder in the Front Range. Things that we can easily recover are materials for reuse and salvage. That's like the soft strip of a house where you're coming through saying, I'm going to take these lighting fixtures and the sinks and the faucets and be able to take them to Habitat or to Resource Central or put them on Craigslist, find ways that they can be reused. We also allow for reuse if a homeowner or property owner wants to use that same material back into their building. They just have to catalog that material is there and is going to go back into the home. We can easily recycle metal. There's lots of scrap metal recyclers around here. Also, we can recycle clean and untreated wood. So wood that's not painted or stained. You can, if it's source separated, you can take it over to Western. Western Disposal offers a chipping service, and that's right now they're utilizing it as animal bedding. We are looking into new markets where it can hopefully be denailed, potentially for reuse. But we at least know that the wood has a diverted home from the landfill. And then aggregates, that's where we're primarily talking about asphalt, brick, concrete. Other examples can be granite, it can be porcelain toilets, all of that type of material is accepted by aggregate recyclers. And there's 2 that are within like a 10-mile drive of the city center. What can't be landfilled? So your drywall, whether it's clean or painted, we don't. It has to be landfilled, yeah. Thank you. You're welcome. We can't recycle this. Asphalt shingles from roofs and painted and stained, sorry for the typo there, but painted and stained wood. There are, through the Circular Economy Development Center, they are exploring options for those 3. They're trying to help promote those markets. So we will just kind of keep in touch with Circular Colorado, understand what changes there are, and we're hoping to kind of revise the ordinance to maybe not just say 3 materials, but you must recycle materials that have a known end market and really focusing on that. And that I think allows for the expansion of that. And then we'll get into the creative solutions we have seen.
Emily, question?
Yes,
So you say 75% of the waste
Yeah.
by weight. How do you measure that?
so we get primarily just through weight tickets that are provided by the facility in which materials are taken to. So the aggregate recyclers have scale houses. So you usually get a weight ticket for metal as well. If you're taking material to Resource Central, they have standard weights for donated materials. So they're able to provide information.
How do you know how much it costs? Weight in
The upfront, yeah,
Yeah, the upfront.
it's a sticking point right now.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, we were, like, when you're having to estimate it at the front end. Yeah, we heard that as feedback from the deconstruction working group is that it is difficult for contractors to know what those weights of materials are. And we're looking just kind of like remove the estimation on the front end. We would probably recommend that we keep the 75% as that target for diversion. But really trying to emphasize you need to divert materials with known markets. So
The plan they fill out in the beginning.
it's probably gonna change.
Well, but we asked them to estimate the weight of the building, and there's a few different methodologies to do that. They're not exact science,
Sure.
of course,
But I
but
think as we get
Yeah.
history of this square foot
Exactly.
building.
Yes,
it gets better and
Sort of
better.
equivalent to this square,
Yeah.
you know.
yeah, and we're trying to kind of look at that information.
Cool.
Yeah, and then go to the next slide. So our current successes, you're gonna see 2 numbers, so you're gonna see 73, it's like 73.8, but you know. It's thereabouts. This is where we were at in terms of reported projects that have closed out prior to Alpine Balsam being deconstructed. The number is going to jump exponentially once we have that project. We wanted just to kind of point that out because you'll see the number is like with Alpine Balsam included is going to be over 75%. And you're like, if you're sitting here going, well, why do we need these changes? The changes that we are working to explore both internally and with the feedback we're getting from the deconstruction working group is because even though we're sitting at 73%, if you go back over to the challenges column, we have these creative tree materials. Sometimes it's like, I will do the foundation and literally a patio table with 4 chairs, that counts as donation. And they did some shrubs. And so what we are finding as we're digging into the data and seeing what's happening over the last 3.5 years is that, and this is not for all contractors, but the contractors that are continuing with the model of a demolition is they are attempting to get as close to 75% as possible by just doing the foundation of the building. And then meeting the other material categories by saying, well, I donated a table. I'm good. That's one category. And technically we accept that. And we did the trees because, you know, they needed to come down to expand the footprint of the house. But it's not, as Jonathan mentioned at the start of this, is not looking at the embodied carbon and what can be saved from all of the valuable materials in the building itself. They are, in a lot of cases, people are demolishing the building and just trying to recycle the foundation, which is what they've always done. It's cheaper to send the foundation to an aggregate recycler than to landfill. So it's not necessarily changing the way we're looking at the value of building materials. And that's what we're hoping through this working group and coming to you guys is for feedback on how we might want to structure an ordinance that will allow us to see the importance of the built environment.
I don't understand that part. So the ordinance is to, we must divert 75% of the building, but then what do you mean like elevating a table and stuff? How does that make it?
Foundation is a significant percentage of the building weight.
So like 24.98, then the table gets it.
So
There's a
They're also just
category.
three, you have to do at least 3 materials.
So as long as, so a table could be
a
like
table would be considered donation.
0.001%.
Yes.
Okay.
And like the shrubs might be at a 0.5% of that weight. And then they did the foundation. I ran some numbers this past week on 3 contractors who are deconstruction contractors. They're the ones who are actually taking these buildings down. And they're averaging around 9% coming from not the foundation. 9% of the total diversion is from that. So it's actually really good. We were kind of thinking around 10-ish, so it was kind of
You're
spot
saying
on.
91% is. 9% is not the foundation.
Yeah, 9% of the total project weight is like not foundation, then
Which
say
means
like
90% is foundation.
no, because you have to account for the landfill material. So landfill is around like 13 or so percent of the total. They're averaging around anywhere from 75, and I've seen some on certain projects upwards of 90+% on residential projects. So,
Emily, is it fair to say, just to kind of summarize, I guess what I hear you saying is that we've had a couple of years of this ordinance and this program in effect, and we're realizing there are some loopholes.
yes.
And so when you say challenges, it's just what we're realizing, what contractors are doing to meet the requirements of the ordinance, and that really doesn't meet the intent of the ordinance. Okay.
Exactly. And we're gonna talk about intent, I think, on the next slide. So I think let's just go there. Yep. Intent is really small in that bottom
Yeah, so maybe you could
left
just,
corner. So I'll just kind
so
of,
everybody can
Yeah.
read all the words up there, so maybe just kind of highlight or summarize what's up there.
yeah, so with the working group, the intent of what we're trying to do with the working group for their feedback, but also as to where we're hoping to vision where this ordinance could potentially go is how can we maximize keeping building materials in use and out of the landfill through reuse, recycling, and organics management. And then the second piece of that intent is to really level that playing field between contractors. So everyone's, as it says, playing by the same rules. Right now, if Jamie's a homeowner and she wants to take her property down, she might get a deconstruction contractor bidding it at this level, and then Jonathan comes in, he's like, I'm a demolition contractor, I can do it for a significantly less cost. And so, and still meet these requirements, or you'll get close enough and it's okay. What we want to make sure through this ordinance is that we are clear as to what our expectations are, that we are defining how to maximize the reuse and recycling of building materials. So when Jamie goes out to bid for taking down her home, the next time when she gets 2 contractors, they're providing quotes around that same level of service. I think it's also important to note that like a residential homeowner probably isn't aware, unless they are like environmentally conscious and minded of what the requirements are. So they're like, well, why would I pay this amount when I can pay this other amount? So we really want to make sure it's fair. So in the working group, we covered a lot of different topics. We had 5 meetings, and we kind of just level set, understood, heard what those challenges are. We had other cities come in and present. So Palo Alto is the only other city with the same type of ordinance that we have, where it covers residential and commercial buildings of all ages. Other cities might just focus on residential buildings of a certain age and older. So we provided a lot of different perspectives for consideration to our working group. With that working group, I want you to know, I reached out to over 400 people. These are all people who had applied or had their name or contact information on a permit in the last 3.5 years. And we've consistently had anywhere from 15 to 20 participants. Most of them are contractors. And then we've had processors and haulers also join in. So that kind of describes the makeup of our group. All right, we'll just go towards the next slide. So Taylor's working to dig into the data. The data we have, like we have kind of like a baseline data, but it doesn't give us like, it doesn't allow us to see like compare project by project or like contractor aggregated projects and what their results are. So we're really hoping to better understand the impacts of the deconstruction ordinance and also be able to have better transparency into that. We're looking at tracking software that will actually be able to do this. There's several tracking softwares that are out there that other cities are using. Excel just is not cutting it. It's way too difficult. And there's a lot of administrative burden around that as well. We're looking at, is there a certain square footage that we might want to say, like if your project is 500 square feet or less, you know, the impact is really not there. And so we're looking at some of these different thresholds that might make it easier to take down like smaller buildings that have less of a built environment and carbon impact, and really exploring what that might look like. So there's no guarantees on what our suggestions might be, but we're just really trying to better understand that data so we can be more informed. So we'll go next slide. Wanted to highlight Alpine Balsam. So from the interior deconstruction we're sitting right almost at 44%. That's when you're looking at that, the drywall, the insulation, the materials that we can't divert from the landfill. And when we looked at the total weight, 97% by weight of what went to landfill, or that total, of the total project was drywall. We really understand drywall is a significant impact, but it is just no option. We have to landfill it. But once we've cleared everything out to what we call the core and shell, so it's just the support structure, we were able to reuse and divert 98.5% of the exterior of that building and all the levels in between. So that gave us a total of 93.5% diversion across the entire project. Things I want to like highlight that I think are just absolutely amazing. It's not been done anywhere in the US before is the reuse of this steel. So we worked with KLNA. They are a local structural engineer to save and salvage 536 steel I-beams. Those are those major support structures of those commercial buildings. 30 pieces of that are were lost to damage, but 90 pieces are currently going into the construction of the new fire station 3. So we're able to get and create spec sheets so that those who are building the new buildings have every confidence that the steel coming out of the hospital is structurally sound and can work to support that building. And that's what we really are talking about when we look at circular economies. How can we identify, save, and preserve that carbon? Some people might argue steel is infinitely recyclable, same. And yes, it is, but then you have to worry about transportation, smelting, remanufacturing, and then transportation and the sale of that material again. This is a way for us to completely avoid those carbon impacts and emissions and bring this into a true circular building. So it's just, I think, an amazing way that we approach this project. do you have any questions specifically on, oh, I also want to say the concrete, so it was a concrete form building. So the concrete. If you look at kind of that darker brown area. All of the old hospital was crushed in place and filled that hole. And so we did not have to truck the concrete off property. We did not have to then purchase and bring back in fill that would have been required. So everything that, while it looks like a dark
Yeah, looks like
brown
dirt.
piece of dirt, that is actually the hospital sitting in there. And we actually were able to work with another a hotel just up the hill that was coming down. And we needed more fill. We didn't have enough fill to fill that hole. So we were able just to truck it 2 miles down the road or up the road, if you will, and crush the material on site. So it helped and benefited both projects. So it's just an incredible story. And if you look right on, I think it's Alpine, right, that's the northern street. It's a residential street. People also ask about the noise associated with this, because it does take longer to take down that deconstruction. We had 4 noise monitors around each of the property edges. The only spikes we got that were above were from like fire station or from fire engines going by. Because of how we were able to block the buildings, it really minimized the impact, and we had 0 noise complaints from any of the residents or businesses there. So another exciting piece of that.
Okay, and I've been on a personal, I have a little bit of a personal challenge to get Broomfield to do this with their first bank center they're pulling down. And so, fun fact, we just met with them last week, their staff, to go over this project, and they asked us a bunch of questions, so.
Just doing a quick time check.
Okay. Yeah, I'll just.
We still good on,
We're okay.
Yep, we do not have any other public participants.
thank
at the
you.
moment.
Okay,
Yeah, Taylor's on too, just so you know.
awesome. Hey, Taylor.
Taylor's having trouble joining as a
Never
panelist, so.
And she's on her. So, you know, we said that we're right around 73% diversion. This is where we are at. We're at 87, just over 87% if you are accounting for the Alpine Balsam Hospital deconstruction. So in that first half of year, so the 2020 is since ordinance implementation, we achieved 85%. 2021, we're at 72, 2022 at 68. I want to note it on the 2022 one, a lot of those projects, about half of them right now are not reporting. They haven't sent us the data, so it's incomplete data for the year. In 2023, we only have a handful of projects. We have about, I think, 5 or 6 projects that have been completed from this year. It includes the Alpine Balsam Hospital, which is why we're sitting at 96%. So it really, you know, part of me says, oh, the hospital deconstruction skews this. I kind of initially thought and said that, but I also want to say, like, it really doesn't, because if that is how we were to approach projects, and all buildings are approached and managed in that kind of same way, this shows what is possible. So.
What is the diversion weight units?
Pounds. Yeah.
This version will also include those loopholes we mentioned. Okay.
So this includes anyone who we've had projects. We had one contractor, this is not often, but we did have one contractor who said, I'm not giving you any weights. I will just pay the deposit. We're not giving you anything. We had one project that we're working on this week where they aren't giving us the landfill one. They just said, we don't have the landfill weight. Here's just what we diverted, but there's no way to calculate that. That's like kind of, in a sense, another loophole is like people can just accept the deposit as a fine, and we don't get that information, but that data does go into these reports. So
What will be the deposit?
So it's $1 per square foot, with a minimum of $1,500 right now. So if you have a 900 square foot home, you're gonna pay $1,500. The hospital was a $264,000 deposit, which they got back. Well, the city got back there, I guess.
Yeah.
So that was our largest deconstruction, or that's the largest permit and deposit that we had to accept. So next steps, we're running through some different, scenarios and what we envision through feedback from the deconstruction working group as to what we might want this ordinance to look like. Does it require the source separation of materials that have known markets? Is it, requiring contractors to be trained and maybe get a license? So we know that they understand what those expectations are. The idea of like a license is you wouldn't hire an electrician who didn't have a license or a plumber who didn't have a license. It's kind of taking that same type of idea. So far, we're getting feedback that the license is more desired. City of Portland did a certified contractors list. There's just kind of different mechanisms for doing that. And better information from our data tracking softwares that will help us alleviate that administrative burden. I think that's the biggest thing that Antonia struggles with is people don't have clear expectations. When they submit the information, the verification of receipts takes time. We hear that constantly as a challenge. And we're hoping that if we have a better data management system, we will be able to process and move these permits and inspections through faster as well. So questions for you. Is there anything you would specifically like us to answer? The questions that you have so we can address those before coming back to you. And what do you think about our current engagement with the contractors? And is there anything more that we could be doing?
Sorry, guys, before we open the floor for discussion, I see like 4 participants there.
Yes. Looks like we did have an additional, sorry, mouse disappeared. I'm gonna stop the share for just a moment.
Or is it just double?
I think it's double counting Taylor.
Yeah, let's just proceed.
I'll keep an eye on it. And really quickly, Taylor, I'm seeing you on twice, once as a panelist and once as a participant. So if you want to chime in at all, or if you have something to add, just raise your hand, or you can text me on my cell phone and I'll
Or Teams message.
or team. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm on both actually.
Okay.
If you could promote me on the other one also, you guys could see my face.
Make you a. Oh, yeah, let's hold on. Take a moment for.
It's okay. We likely won't.
So I do have a question about the deconstruction things. Is there, so one of the main loopholes functions around using the foundation as the primary weight percentage. And then what you want to be promoting is increased deconstruction of the interior house and just the house itself and close those loopholes. And also people are deconstructing the foundation anyways. That's just how it's done. It's cheaper to send it to aggregates than it is to trash it. Is it possible to just remove the foundation from the ordinance and just not have that be able to be counted towards weight or towards material count? If it's already getting deconstructed and that's the way to do it, then there's no reason to be able to include it, right? And then that would force people to deconstruct additional parts of the house in order to meet requirements and meet weight percentages if you apply those to the house instead of the entire building.
So
If the foundation is just getting deconstructed anyways.
That was kind of the reason I started running the numbers with the 3 contractors that I know like are trying to deconstruct the houses. And taking that approach, because I wanted to know like what was like a potential achievable percentage if it was the rest of the house. Given what can be diverted in the known markets. So that's kind of why I'm like, where I'm landing out is around like a 9% of the total weight. And you still would like to include the foundation, just so you can kind of get that full scope of diversion. And so when we're talking about that 600 million tons of stuff, I think it's just, we still want those numbers, but what we're trying to think through is how can we de-emphasize the foundation, which is what I think you're talking about, is like if we de-emphasize and take away the power, if you will, of the foundation and find out how we can say you need to maximize the reuse and recycling of the actual building itself. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think for data and numbers, sure, include the foundation, absolutely. But in terms of like for forming the ordinance, is there any reason to include the foundation? Like in terms of like once we have the data, we know how much of a house is theoretically recyclable and reusable. We know how much of a house like the foundation is. Is there any reason to include the foundation in the ordinance for deconstruction?
Like as a determination of
anything.
Of like the deposit refund.
Right, like what is the purpose of allowing the foundation to be included if the foundation is already being deconstructed by system, like?
Well, can I say like, you can include that as a necessary, but you don't include that as part of the weight construction, like, yeah, you have to deconstruct and do the foundation, but you take your numbers from the rest of the building or something.
Yeah.
You know.
We can look at it.
I think
Absolutely.
we're
Yeah, we're open to any ideas.
Yeah, we're looking at that, and it's kind of this idea of talk to Jamie and to Veronica about of like, is it X% like of 75%? Like if, let's say we keep 75%, is it like that 10% is we want to see 10% of non-aggregate, non-foundation, and that's your target. That's really the target.
Right.
What would happen if the ordinance was anything that can be recycled or reused, you have to do it? Is that just too cost prohibitive or?
I think that's kind of what we're hoping to get out of with this idea of like source separation of any material with a known market.
Yeah.
And we're trying, like, we were debating, do you take away like a percentage or a weight measure? My fear of taking that away is like, someone might say, well, all I could do was the patio and 4 chairs. And how do you like ensure that those materials were maximized? We're like, oh, it was really just 100 pounds of wood coming out of this house. And that's all, you know, so I was worried about, at first I was like, let's just take the weights away because it's hard to estimate, it's hard to do this, but then, well, what if somebody were to say 100 pounds of metal, 100 pounds of wood, 500,000 pounds of, which can be, of residential foundation, but you don't have a way to like balance that with, was that really everything that you could do?
Right.
And so I think that's what I'm and my team are like currently struggling with is like, we could go as simple as saying, if it has a market, you must recycle it. But how do we know they didn't just do one small load of wood and then put the rest into landfill?
And you don't do, like, as you're building, you have inspections, you don't have any kind of inspection.
We don't currently
Right.
have
Fire.
inspections during the process. It is like all at the end where you're just looking at.
Someone
wait,
does that. What city?
Palo Alto.
Yeah, the Palo Alto does do a pre-inspection.
Okay.
They have a bigger team. They have, I think, 4 people who are working on this full time. They go out, they meet with the contractors on site, they have to explain and walk through the site. They have to talk about where they're going to place bins, because they do have a source separation requirement. And then I want to say they go out, they might go out mid-time, just to like kind of check and say, is this really happening? And then they get the weights at the end.
And really quickly, Taylor,
Yeah.
go ahead, Taylor.
Hi all, sorry I couldn't be there in person and I haven't had the pleasure of meeting you, but Taylor Ryman, I just joined a couple months ago with Climate Initiatives, been with the city for a little bit longer, but getting into the construction and demolition world. I just wanted to chime in here because like I'm kind of new and wanted to share my perspective on how we're trying to approach this. And I think there's two major objectives, that being let's meet the ordinance intent better, and then also let's reduce administrative burden. And part of that is, as Emily mentioned, that evaluation up front, making it a little bit less subjective and more objective. And each project is so different is what I'm learning. Each structure and the way that it's deconstructed, what are the abatement needs? Like, is it going to be too hazardous to perhaps get up close and personal with those materials and take them down? Is it possible that we could do like a mixed approach where we see kind of deconstruct part of a building, but then the other part of the building maybe needs to be more kind of demoed? So we're figuring out what that evaluation looks like up front. We're working with like abatement specialists to figure out what assessments do they do, and how could that inform our ability to determine what is recoverable, and then our ability to say like what new either pieces of the ordinance in that update needs to be put into place, what programs can we create to help people achieve the diversion of the recoverable materials without getting through those loopholes. What that's also going to look like though is us adding more rules and potentially more evaluation requirements on either staff side or a third-party specialist side. So if we're also trying to reduce administrative burden, it might be advantageous for us to create like a project threshold, right? So that we're not essentially like going through this higher intensity evaluation process with every single project, but maybe we can work with the more heavy hitting projects in the city more closely, because we'll have the time to perhaps do more training with them, do site visits, do pre-inspections and things like that.
Maybe there's also a way to keep track of certain like people that you've worked with who have shown. Yeah. You know, like, yeah, I hate having a bunch of rules, but it's also like, yeah, like if we know that these people are more helpful in diverting them, I don't know.
We
It's a whole-
We definitely
whole
know
set
like
of
a kind of, I have kind of like my top three that I'm like, we see their name come across and you're just like, okay, you can kind of breathe a little bit. They understand what that expectation is. I think the idea that we have is exploring a training program, because we don't want to just be like relieved when we have those three contractors come across the board. We would like, as a city, to know that everyone who's gone through a training program, and there are deconstruction trainers that exist and have been used by other cities, to make sure those contractors are on the same page, that they have the skills, that they can take that knowledge back to their employees and transfer it. Because I also feel like it is kind of the city's responsibility to say, if we're going to require deconstruction, which is new to most of the way you've ever done business, we want to make sure you have the knowledge and skills, and not just understanding our requirements or expectations, but we want to make sure you are set up for success. And if we go to this like training route, we'd likely kind of have like a year and a half launching in, because we want to make sure that's all set up before any of these new requirements kind of like take place. And if you're gonna get a license, we want to make sure they have the time to accumulate that knowledge, the training, and then any forms and other administration that would have to go through the city for that. So we're exploring what that looks like right now. But I think training is a huge piece. It's right now we did this working group, but we've hosted webinars, we've recorded them. People are just like not necessarily listening or attending, and there's a handful of ones who want to learn and reach out or attend. But it's not everybody. We can invite everyone, but the ones that really, in my mind, might need this aren't the ones attending. And we really want to get everyone the opportunity to really get this information. If we require the training, then we know they have to take it. And then they have the ability to do work in Boulder.
Go ahead.
Oh, I just have a question on the kind of administrative early stage, if you are, say, a homeowner looking to take down your home, what have you, what that process looks like. So I assume that there are kind of two different permits that you have to apply for, one being demolition, one being deconstruction. Is that true, or is it a singular permit? And then within that, is there any information or requirement that they have to, say, watch a 20-minute informational video or something to make them aware of deconstruction as an option and the benefits that it may provide?
So it's well, if you're a property owner, you're probably getting two permits at some point. So it's the deconstruction permit. We got it renamed a full structure removal. I was trying to go for a deconstruction permit, but the tag code is still DEM, so people still say I'm getting my demolition permit. So I was like, oh man, that's a whole nother story. But so you get the permit to remove the building, and then you're gonna get a building permit for the new build. So those are the two permits that we get. The requirements right now are that you have to submit, for us, submit a sustainable deconstruction plan. We're identifying the materials and currently estimating the weight of those materials. And you provide us an asbestos report, so we understand if there's any environmental hazards that would potentially be present in that building, so we can make a plan with you around that. That's where we like describe the process, but we do not have a video that is to be watched, but I love that
Right, but
idea.
if they're like, if you are deciding what to do with the home, like, say you just want to demolish it, is there a way to draw in people who may be planning to demolish anyway and reroute them to deconstruct?
Well, they have to fill out
The form.
this form,
Okay.
our internal
It
form.
explains the process, but it's not
Yeah.
like a video as to why,
Right.
but I think that's a really.
So they would see that and make a conscious choice that they're not gonna follow this requirement and forfeit their deposit, but we don't see that happen very often.
Yeah, but I still like the idea
yeah, it's
of how can you better educate the public, because I think right now we've been thinking about trainings for contractors, but I think that's a really good idea for us to explore, is how can we have a component for the public so they're aware of as to why this is happening as well.
Do they still need to get a deconstruction permit if they just pay the deposit/fine? Okay, so there's no, okay. What is does this apply to residential mostly, or is it just mostly, significantly to residential, or is it mostly commercial? Like, does it affect the housing cost of a new condominium per square foot? Like, is there an impact on that?
I think there's kind of two parts to your question, so. Hopefully I answer this the way you're looking for, and if not, please ask more questions. So if you're looking at pure numbers of permits that get issued a year, there's approximately 70 permits that require deconstruction that are issued a year. Of that, I would say maybe 5 are commercial projects. So you might think that it's more heavily weighted towards a residential project. But one of the things that Taylor brought up is like, when you're looking at those high impact projects, that number like that we're seeing out of the Alpine Balsam Hospital is going to be so much more significant in terms of volume and environmental impact. Those commercial projects are just going to have so much more weight and potential for diversion than all of the residential permits put together for that 1 year. So I think that's one of the things that we're looking at is like, when we're thinking about what is that high impact, do we want to focus on just these, or, you know, is there a certain size of a home and above that would meet that? So counting the number of residential versus commercial doesn't really get you the true impact of that. There's a second part of your question. Oh, the affordability. Yeah.
Yeah, like how does this compete with our affordable housing goals?
So we do not have the ability to like stop a building from coming down. It's more the management of that. The only thing that can determine if a building can't come down is if it has a historic preservation attached to it. There have been some cities that have implemented delays, saying we will delay this permit. So while you explore other options, can you remodel this home so it is able to stay in place? We see homes get scraped that are small ones, and then they put like 4 condos on that same lot, and they just, you know, the property was maybe $1 million property, and now it's a $6 million property, and that affects taxes. That's something that Taylor is looking at as part of, hi Scott, or Sprout, sorry. But I think it does have that impact, and it's like, as those new builds are like bigger and more modern, it does, I think, affect the overall affordability of homes in general. But we can't, like, the way this is and the way that I understand is we can't just stop the building from coming down or what is going up in its place at this point. And it's an unfortunate, I think, consequence.
I would add that I think anytime you add requirements to the building process, it probably, I mean, would you agree, increases costs?
Well, I think the question that you're asking, Hernan, is are the additional costs, if we assume that there are additional costs from deconstruction, how are those passed
Right.
on to the building that's now being built? And does that increase the value of that property, decreasing our ability to create permanently affordable homes? I think, I would say anecdotally, I don't think that's the case, but maybe offer, and I just wanted to offer this up generally. It sounds like, because I know we're a little over on time on this particular topic, would it be helpful to the board to maybe talk about some of the things that you brought up tonight? We're going to be coming back to you, so would it be useful to say, in the ordinance, here are some of the challenges, barriers, some of the loopholes. Here's how we're thinking about addressing those, either through policy or through incentive or kind of programmatic elements, because some of what you brought up is more around training. Some of it is more on the soft side of things. So I think we can look at both of those options and maybe explore some of those direct, here's the issue, here's how we think about solutioning. Would that be useful to you when we come back to you?
Yeah, we were planning on coming back when we actually have concrete options for you to explore and get your input on that.
But if you have anything else to explore in the meantime, we want to make sure that we can kind of address all of that together.
Really quickly, the other really brief comment is that there's a whole other side of this that we haven't really explored, which is the other code development that we are in process with, the energy code and of course the building code. So I think, Greg, to your comment earlier about what can we do on the front end in terms of the deconstruction ability of buildings, we hit that in the building code. So there's a lot of kind of asymmetry in terms of how buildings are being built, and then realizing that the way we're building them more energy efficient sometimes runs afoul of being able to deconstruct them one day. So trying to match those things up and make sure that we're hitting it with our suite of codes is really critical.
And then maybe if I, oh, go ahead, Taylor.
Well, I love that Jonathan brought that up because what I was going to say on the affordability piece is that's part of what we're trying to do with the data is understand like where exactly in the city is this happening? Because on one hand, you bring up a good point is how is this bringing up perhaps the cost of construction and housing in general? The other way you could look at it is where are we making these community investments of development? And if we could figure out this piece of the portion on the deconstruction side, theoretically, in a bright future that I'm sure Boulder's heading towards, will begin requiring design for deconstruction, and these costs become lower, and the process becomes smoother. But helping set this up, understanding like what is the benefit and the burden of this situation? Like, are we really interested in going through this entire process on an 80 square foot shed when we have about 5 to 10 outlier projects out of 70 that make up around 20% of Boulder's entire C&D waste stream? Like where do we want to really focus on doing things well and ironing things out and sort of scale from there, if you will?
Well, thank you guys. Appreciate the talk.
It's a meaty topic. So,
To it.
yeah. And it is
It's under
exciting.
construction, as
It
you would
is.
say.
But we really are modeling this work for the country. Emily is going to a couple of our team is going to build reuse conference in Savannah in the new year to present some of this work. And so it's pretty exciting.
Michelle Crane, who's lead architect, who's gonna present at alongside me, and then one of the deconstruction contractors is gonna come as well for the residential side.
Yeah.
Cool.
It's impressive.
I have one other question. I don't know if it's, you might know, and that is around just with the stuff that we can't recycle, the drywall and the, you know, is there any codes around like not using things that are, you know, that
Yeah.
big of a,
I think we might get there eventually. That's what Taylor mentioned, the design for deconstruction. We're not there yet. I can say I've heard Michelle talk about the hospital project, that all the drywall that went to the landfill is impacting their thinking in our facilities department around how we're working with our buildings and not putting drywall in to begin with. So we may not have requirements for the whole community, but it is certainly affecting our internal organization thinking around module pieces and not creating that waste in the first place. But you're right on, and
Yeah.
where we have to go in
I
the
mean,
future.
when the 2013 flood.
Yeah.
You know, my basement was flooded.
I remember
So the drywall.
so much drywall and carpet. Yes.
Okay, guys, so I guess let's move on to the next topic, the Update on Plastic Pollution Reduction Act, disposable packaging.
Yeah, that's me.
All right,
Can you bring up those slides? And I'll be pretty brief here. I'm just providing. No, you're familiar your topic. I'm just providing you an update. I was asked to come and remind you, well, there are new folks to the board, of what's coming down the pipe right in a few weeks, January 1st. So, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Jamie Harkins. I manage our circular economy team. And I worked on the Plastic Pollution Reduction Act, and we were going through the state legislature, so I'm very familiar with it.
I'm gonna try something a little different because PowerPoint keeps switching which display is which. We're going to. There it goes. This in. Or in PDF mode. Okay, so hopefully
There's no fancy transitions or anything, so I think we should be okay.
hopefully this will help a little bit. If I can see it. All right. Next one's.
So this state law was a result of many, many years of advocacy, both from this, City of Boulder and many other partners. And really, I'll just tee it up as saying it was kind of 4 different policies put into one big one. So it had 4 distinct pieces that I'll highlight here once we have the slide.
Let me know when you're ready.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, sorry. So the first piece that was part of this state law was a statewide bag fee. And so that piece already took effect. So that was January last year. And it was really modeled after our language here in Boulder, which was exciting. It was a 10-cent fee on all paper and plastic checkout bags across the state. The thing that was different was they did just target what they refer to as large stores. And what that meant was really, the governor and our legislators tried to exempt, or didn't try, they successfully exempted stores that were like not part of a franchise. They had less than 3 locations. So there's a list of kind of criteria that if you meet, you're considered a small store. So they really were targeting the big users, which I can say just anecdotally, based on my many years of work on bags, is probably 80% of the bags used are at those large stores. So I did think it was pretty effective. So that was the first piece, which is already taken effect. And then the second piece is that this bag fee transitions to a phasing out of plastic carryout bags starting this January. So again, at those large stores, you may, I know Boulder doesn't have a Walmart, but we do in Lafayette, where Emily and I both live, and they actually phased them out back in January. They were ahead of the curve and just got rid of all their bags. Even paper, there's no bags, so it's great. And weirdly not very controversial. So you thought there would be a revolt, but there really wasn't. So starting in January, our large stores here in town, so think about grocery, Home Depot, those bigger chain stores, will have to phase out the use of plastic bags. They can continue to use paper with that fee attached, but yeah, they do have to phase them out. And there is a grace period. If they have bags in their inventory, we're not asking them to throw them away. They can continue using them, I think, through June. So if you're out and shopping, you may see some after January, but that's the official date. And then the third piece of the Plastic Pollution Reduction Act was a ban on styrofoam food containers. I know, lots of folks have been advocating for this for a very long time.
So through experience.
Yeah. So, and this is a piece that we've really been focusing on. I'll talk about it in a minute, but this will impact a lot of our smaller eateries, a lot of folks who continue to use polystyrene. I shouldn't say styrofoam. It's a branded term, but there's also a grace period built into this part of the policy, so they can continue to use their inventory for a few months after January to buy it down if they purchased it before the new year. So that will also begin January. And then the final piece, you want to go to the next slide. This is a little less, this is to me very exciting, but I think to the community, it's a little less visible, which is Boulder really did play a lead role in many years advocating for the repeal of a state preemption that really prevented cities from putting in further regulations on plastic. So there was a small piece of language in the state code that said we couldn't ban certain plastic products. So we were able to get that put into this bill as well. So that takes effect July 1st of 2024. And so we will be part of Emily's work plan next year as well, as we'll be working on a community engagement and policy process to explore what that could look like for Boulder. Next slide. And so I just wanted to highlight, some of you were here last year when I talked to you about the bag fee. That statewide bag fee did create some inconsistencies for Boulders because we had a different universe of stores. Our previous fee had only applied to food stores. You can imagine some of those were large and some of those were small. So we had to figure out with city council how to make sure we complied with state law, but made it simple for the business community here in Boulder to comply with. So what we ended up doing, and this was back in 2022, was January of last year, or earlier this year, we folded into our fee program all the stores that were covered by the state law. So Home Depot, Nordstrom, any large stores that weren't already collecting the fee. All of our grocery stores were already doing it. But then we decided to really simplify things, and starting this January, it's just going to be every retail store in the city. So there's no longer these criteria you have to figure out if it applies to you. So that will be taking effect January 1st. We do anticipate a little bit of a transition period. Despite our best efforts, I'm sure it's about 900 stores. We've been collecting the fee from about like 80. So it's a significant jump in how many businesses will be engaging with the program. So we have a lot of tools for them. And of course, we'll have a grace period to get them on board. So, but the fee remains the same. It's still 10 cents for now on all paper and plastic bags. They do remit 6 of that to the city and they're able to retain 4 of it. So it is also a revenue source for the stores to offset, signage, education, bags they want to purchase for their customers.
Wait, won't they?
Yeah.
They can't have the plastic bags.
They can if they're a small store.
Oh, okay.
And that is actually one of the questions that's coming up the most right now is a lot of small stores in Boulder are thinking they have to get rid of them. It's January 1st. Of course, we would love them to, but technically the state law only applies to the large ones. But we're making that pretty clear on our website for them right now.
What is the line of deviation for a small store, large store?
It's to be defined as a small store, and we kept the state definition. You have to have 3 or fewer locations, not be a part of a corporation or franchise, and not have a location outside of Colorado. So the example I highlighted with council in 2022 that made this really tricky was McGuckin Hardware. Technically qualifies as a small store because it's the ownership structure, even though they go through a lot more bags than say, like a Nordstrom maybe, where you're just getting everything in one bag, so it's not the best. I don't know if I were doing a state law, I don't know if that's how I would have done it, but those were the criteria. Okay. Yeah, I think we're good to move on. So I just wanted to highlight what we're doing to prepare the community. So we've been working with our partners over at PACE, which is part of the county. They serve as our one-on-one business advising team. And they have been preparing for this for years, since we've known it's coming. And they have been collecting information. They know who is still using polystyrene food containers in our community, and they're really targeting them with that one-on-one assistance. I'll show you in a second. We produced a guide to sustainable serviceware, to really help them make those decisions about what else to purchase when they can't buy styrofoam. And then we're really trying to look at this as an opportunity to shift folks to reusables as much as possible. While we're in there, while we're talking to them, like how do we get them to can we share our why of why we want them to move away from disposable options when possible? And so, as Emily mentioned earlier, before we started the meeting, we have that $1,500 grant that can be used for something like Deliver Zero, but it can also be used for installing a dishwasher or whatever they need to improve their use of reusable systems. And then Chart Reuse is a tool that's been developed by an organization called Upstream Solutions that we've been chatting with. So we also are providing an opportunity where PACE will come in and really, it provides like the financial comparison, like disposable versus reuse for them. So just some of the things we're doing to really help folks in this transition. The PACE team is incredible and they've been working in our business community for decades. So they have really great relationships. Next slide. And so I just wanted to highlight on this slide is an example of the matrix of the guide to sustainable serviceware. So we put this together with our partners at the county and EcoCycle and our composters and our haulers. So it's really a spectrum from best to worst of what you should try to avoid and what alternatives we would try to push you towards, depending on what kind of containers you need. So there's photos and descriptions. We anticipate this might need to change as you all are familiar. We had to like take compostable options out of here as they're not compostable right now, but we did work really closely with EcoCycle and our recycling center folks to make sure what we're recommending is the best option for our community here. So this is part of PACE's packet that they go to restaurants with and can really sit down with them and work through their options. So I think that was, yeah, so that's the update. It's really a lot happening in January, but we've been working on it for many years. So I'm really confident that we have a lot of tools in place to help our folks. We're also doing, We're also doing, Taylor's been working with the chamber. We're gonna do an English webinar and a Spanish, primarily, actually exclusively Spanish version of the webinar, partnering with the chamber and the Latino chamber. That's coming up next week, the first one that will be recorded and pushed out as well. So we're trying to come up with creative ideas for getting info out. And PACE has been sending info out through their channels all year. But yeah, what was your question?
Is there a website for the information?
Yes, we have. We've been updating our city website, so I can share that with all of you. That's helpful. That summarizes all of these requirements. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, is it available? I guess nobody is on the calls that.
Oh, yeah, I'm not sure if we have a vanity URL that I can like easily share. It's just bouldercolorado.gov/ I think something. Maybe we should work on that, actually.
It's not a bad idea.
Yeah, they try to steer us away from vanity URLs.
Well, maybe if it's short term, just
Mhm.
because we're kind of
That's a
moving into
little
an
easier.
implementation phase. It might be
Yeah.
something.
But we do have it.
Oh, here it is.
Oh, there we go. Thank you. So yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions, but a lot of exciting things, and we will certainly be back to you as we go down the path of exploring what other things we want to do for other single-use plastics. You will certainly hear from us. So,
Do we have any data on the environmental impact of reusable bags in terms of like production, like manufacturing?
you know, I had some that's pretty old at this point. I'd have to go look to see if there's been anything updated. I will say that when I researched it, which was back when we did our bag fee here in Boulder originally, it really depended on where the bag was produced and what it was made out of. So you had options. I'll be honest, many of the bags you find in the stores made in China from virgin materials, that's gonna be a harder environmental impact to justify. But we were really careful when we sourced the bags we give away as the city. They're manufactured in the US from recycled content materials. So we checked on the water use. We had a whole bunch of criteria that folks had to reply with when they sent us their bids. So I can look to see if there's anything more updated, but it's really highly dependent on where and what it's made out of. Like cotton bags are really a lot more impact because of the,
Yeah, I guess as a consumer, you know, like to know where do I get these bags?
yeah.
Like, is it, I get, you know, crappy bags, it's not making any,
We'll
is it
get you
making a
some good
difference?
bags from our staff. But yeah, it's something that I do think is a great thing to educate around. And there's been some national stories about reusable bags. And when you pick apart they kind of cherry pick the data to make the headline. So you really have to dig in and see like what they were looking at, but it's just not an easy thing to like summarize because it really depends on what it's made of.
So, but even without the data, you will consider this a step in the right direction.
A what?
Even without that data on the trade-off and the impact, you will still.
I
consider
would.
this a step in the right direction.
I do, and I think part of that has to be the front end impacts. So we know a lot, and EcoCycle's been doing a lot of research this year, which they haven't put out publicly all of it yet, on the toxicity and the impacts on the front end of plastics manufacturing, both bags and also the black plastics that food comes in a lot, and the toxicity embedded in those, and how a lot of the carry-out bags made of plastic are, you know, manufactured in the area called Cancer Alley in Louisiana, where we're seeing, you know, really horrid effects of petroleum refineries. So there's an environmental justice component. So I do think that as a city, we've decided that moving towards reusable items is the right direction, but yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
Does the 6 cents the city gets go to something specific, or
Does what?
the money?
Oh, excellent question. So up until the state law took effect, so up until January 1st, 2023, the money that came into Boulder under our city bag fee was very restricted. It was our ordinance defined that I could only use it for things that offset the impact of bags, because it was a very direct fee relationship. So we do purchase reusable bags for our food banks and items like that with that money, but there is some still in there. But the state law actually widened the scope, so they are allowing us to use that fee money for any waste reduction program. So yeah, so all the money that came in this year and moving forward can be used for any waste reduction, which is great. Helpful for me.
I remember you had data on like the use or the amount of like the fees people were paying or something. It had plateaued.
Yes.
Do you have updated numbers on
I
that?
don't, because that was modeled the first 4 years of our fee. So the fee went into effect 2013, I believe. And we had consultants model what the bag use would look like without a fee.
Mhm.
And we were able to compare that to what was actually what we saw in the community, and we were able to measure that reduction. That was so, I mean, at this point, it's almost 10 years old, and we haven't had a consultant continue those projections of without a fee, what would have happened. So I can say that what I think is really interesting, a tidbit you might like to know. I thought when we added this year 50-ish new stores to our fee program, our revenue would go up, and it didn't. Which I thought was super interesting, and it told me that all of the press and all of the statewide impact of that fee taking effect was that bag use reduced even at places that already had a fee in our town.
Interesting.
Right? I thought we'd like have tons of money coming in, and we really didn't. It's pretty much, it's a little more, but nothing like you would think with that many more stores. Because everyone, before it took effect, everyone was asking me, other cities around here to project what they would receive, and I'm like, I have no idea. I think that mental impact, that cultural impact of having something statewide was super exciting.
Yeah.
And we saw a dramatic reduction. So I would say, you know, I think I told you all before, the first 4 years of the fee, we saw about a 68% reduction in bag use. I would say it's more now, just because of revenue. But I don't have like that other number to actually calculate.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
So given that, do you have a sense or have you had feedback from the community anticipating any problems, pushback, or excitement about what's going to be rolling out next year?
It's been really quiet. There was a lot of excitement January last year.
Mhm.
And a lot of press, like 9 News did some stories. And they actually told me it was their most clicked on story ever, the bag fee. So Steve and Kyle Clark down there like want to do more stories about plastics. Turns out plastics are a popular story. So yeah, no, it's been really quiet. I think we'll hear a little more from the business community as they explore these options, and that's why we're really preparing to help them. But no, I think mostly the community's ready. I mean, I've been here almost 14 years, and I've been hearing we should ban styrofoam for pretty much 14 years. So I think the community is pretty on board.
The dream come true.
Yeah.
I would say there's a real significance in creating consistency across the state. I don't think that there was much feedback from the Boulder community because we've been at this a long time. Our ordinance went into effect in 2010. So it's been a very long time that our community has kind of socialized the idea that you pay 10 cents for a bag. So this just seemed like the logical next step. But I think, Karen, on to your question, last year when we were talking to the board about setting the fee, should it be 10, should it be 20, should it be more? If you were just looking at the fee as the incentive to drive the behavior, I think it would be a more prominent conversation. But taking that you have this statewide policy that kind of creates this overlay for the entire state, I just think it's really easy. It's much easier for people to understand when they go from city to city, what's expected. Businesses know how they do business in the state. And so it's that systems change that we're always talking about that we really drive. And I just really want to acknowledge the hard work that Jamie and her team put in to help move this policy forward in the state, because this is where we needed to get to.
So is there a reason that we're not expanding the banning of single-use plastic bags in the city to all stores? Since we can do that now, is there a reason why we're not doing it right now?
It's part of our process. We can't until January 1st next year. And so it'll be part of our discussions. We can now, we couldn't before. You know, when we did the bag fee back in 2012, the community actually wanted to ban bags.
Yes.
But that legal language I highlighted prevented us from doing it. So
And so now that it's an option, we're gonna start looking into it. Okay.
So a question about not bags, but the compostable
Yeah.
containers and food
service
utensils and stuff like that. Is there anything new on that front?
So no, we were just actually out at a tour at Western Disposal on Monday, and we were looking at the compost stream. It's getting better, but it's still pretty dirty, the commercial stream. I asked if they've heard any rumors about A1 Organics starting to accept some of that, and absolutely not. In fact, we actually heard another facility in Colorado is just out, pulled it too, that was still accepting them.
Out towards the plane.
Yeah, so I don't see them coming back very quickly. I think it's more likely, Jonathan and I have discussed this. What you see in California especially, which has some statewide requirements around composting, is that there's a different process for the commercial stream. So instead of going to a compost facility like we have, that's really hard to pull that contamination out. They divert the commercial compost to like an anaerobic digestion system that's more able to deal with all of that serviceware and because it's just not like the recycling center where we can sort it out. Like it all gets ground and then all the problematic stuff is in there. So I don't think it's gonna come back soon, but we're working on other solutions, so.
And then what about plastic coated with paper or whatever?
Yeah.
Combination of,
Still problematic.
okay.
Yeah, so I think the first thing we'll see come back to the compost is the large bags that weren't allowed, which will really help our business community, but there was a state law, so I should have brought this up. We did support a bill last year, requirements for compostable products. So a lot of the things you're talking about where it's paper lined with plastic that folks think is like recyclable or compostable, it's gonna have to be more clearly labeled now. To
Recycling.
prevent, yeah, exactly, to prevent some of that greenwashing, you know. So it's gonna continue to be an issue, I'll just be honest. A lot of these, we have to get to a point where it's not on the consumer to have to make these decisions of when they're standing at the bin of what to do with these things, and that's why we're hoping to move in the direction of trying to affect the larger systems.
We saw it as like an opportunity for to like kind of leapfrog towards like reuse and showing how we don't have to, like, there are other options, like a Deliver Zero and these type of containers. But there's gotta be more systems in places for collection and making sure even our environmental advisory board knows about it.
Knows it's an option.
Yeah, because it's just, drywall, all this paper. line,
Drywall and
You know,
plastics,
like all those
oh
things,
my.
like, okay, how do we?
Yeah.
We're also
account for
doing
that?
a Save Our Soils campaign and focusing like what makes good compost and compostable like serviceware and to-go containers don't reintroduce that.
nutrients
Yeah,
in
there's
there.
like, those nutrients aren't being reintroduced and it's just a filler. And so it was a way for us to kind of, we were real disappointed, then we're like, well, like, there's ways for us to think about this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a question about like, how much waste does Boulder create in a day or a week or a
Oh
month?
my
And
goodness.
like, how
Might
big,
have to do that.
you know, how
We can
big
get
would
you the
it?
data.
Yeah,
We can get you the data.
yeah.
I mean, I'm just curious, like, could we have some kind of a program to show like, hey Boulder, this is how much waste you're producing in a day, like.
Yeah.
How long would it take to fill up Folsom Stadium?
Yeah.
Or whatever, something that people go, oh, like that's how much trash or waste we're producing in just in the city.
Right.
To get people to realize, like, you really have to, you can't just use a plastic fork and spoon one time and you compost it.
Yeah, we can get you updated data. I know a couple of years ago, we were producing almost double per person per year than the national average in Boulder, so.
Really?
Yeah, I'll look up the more recent numbers and send it to you.
Wow. I would like.
We are a high consuming community. At least we were a few years ago,
Wow.
but
Okay,
excellent questions. Thank you.
let's take a little break to hear some public input, public participation, sorry.
Sorry about that, just accidentally double clicked. Hi Lynn, welcome. You should be able to speak now.
Yeah, thanks for your flexibility. I wish the other boards had so much flexibility. They have not. I came to the OSBT meeting at 6:09 after rushing from hearing Tom Check at Carruthers on my bike as fast as I could. And at 6:09, and they were scheduled at 6:10, and they wouldn't listen to my testimony. And they were the board that was off of what their usual schedule was because of Hanukkah. And my big concern is, I love Israel. I'm Jewish, Segal, it's a Jewish name. But Israel is suicidal and they've got to stop. Because all of this talk about how big Folsom Stadium is full of our trash is pointless if we are blown to the Stone Age, as we will be if we don't take action up to council and up to the legislature and up to the presidency to get this support for this Israeli suicidality stopped now. Otherwise, we aren't going to have anything to be talking about at these board meetings because we're going to be in the Stone Age also. They're going to come and they're going to start hitting us in the United States, random cities. They'll choose Boulder too. Boulder's just another place. So this is a really big deal. So far as me, I'm freezing cold. Jonathan, I'm tired of being cold, you know, and 23 years of it. And now the city of Boulder is going to augment Xcel Energy with giving these heat pumps that I don't even want, and that I'm going to get rid of as soon as I can get a ground loop heat pump. And that's what I'm pressing the city to really do, because before I have these things installed in my place, I want to know what it costs to remove them. And I don't want to have to be thinking that way. I don't want to be more advanced than my own city is, you know, and I'm appreciative that you want to give me some warmth, which I'm going to probably seldomly turn on because it's still electricity and I still can't have solar. And I need help with getting solar on my place for the last 10 years that I've been trying to. As far as finding contractors that are dependable, you know, the one that was working on my place to fix my attic so that I could have the roof done so that I can have solar was in jail and I had to throw him out. You know, it's like, this is what you get in Boulder. If you're at the bottom of the you know, level of people that are working on their places, that, you know,
Then sorry, you have 50
scrape.
seconds.
And if you're going to scrape, thanks for the admission, but you know, talking about scraping, Gaza is being scraped. It's being demolished. 770 Circle is a stone house on the open space, the wildlife interface, and it's being demolished. There is so much excess in this country. We are going to get
Thank
blasted
you.
back to the Stone Age if we don't do something first. We've got to stop this waste. You're talking about waste. This is big time waste.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you for
8,000
your
square
input.
foot place, demolished, stone.
Thank you. Okay. Back to our agenda.
I think I would just like to say, I think it's great that we get feedback from everybody, even if it's hard for us to hear, you know. It's not exactly my purview necessarily, but it's good to hear it.
All right, so are we ready? Does anybody have any questions? You good? Okay. So, thank you so much, guys.
Thank you all.
Appreciate
So nice
it.
to see you all.
Have a good night.
Just leave them there, I'll take care of it. Thank you, Heather. And pass along our thanks to you. Absolutely.
Jonathan, I think we have time in terms of like few months to discuss item 6A, so maybe we can move it to the January meeting. What do you think?
Oh, yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, okay. So, I prefer a motion to move item 6A to the meeting, to the January meeting. Anybody second?
What is it, okay?
It's the discussion of, there was the council and city staff, they hired a consultancy firm to analyze the boards of how they work, their effectiveness, their time, like the time people volunteer on the board, and there were some results. And I thought as a board, we should discuss them and form an opinion on those. But we still have time to do that. So since we are almost out of time, I felt like we could move it to the January meeting. Like if you wanna read about it, it's part of the package.
I did.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
I don't think there's any time sensitivity. It was more an informational item for all of you. There'll be more information coming back from the city manager's office as they think about implementing any of the recommendations that from the consultant, but we're a little ways off from that.
Good. Sounds good. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
All right, so let's move to the next item, which is chair rotations. Jonathan and I had a discussion on this. The way the chair rotates is usually every member gets a 1-year appointment and the chair rotates at the end of the year. However, in the past couple of years, we've had a lot of people leave the board. So I took the position of chair in May, I believe. So I wanted to bring that up with you guys and see if it will be okay for me to switch that position in May of 2024 to, or if you have any strong opinions about that, to just bring them up and we can discuss them.
I'd be happy to have you serve through next May.
Okay.
The one thing that I will bring up is that then I believe chair would come to me
Yes.
on my last year. And so then I would be chair for 5-6 months and then be off the board. And so I think that we could slowly work our way back, like over a couple of years. And so then everybody gets a few months less, so rather than the appointment getting shifted in May, it gets shifted in April or March. And so then the next year it's back to January, so that we like reshift it back to January, because that works with when appointments happen.
Does it?
Yeah,
I was appointed in March.
We discussed it as well when the appointments happen.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, the city, so city council, starts their recruitment typically in January and February. And then April, is usually when they do interviews. And then May-ish, sometimes that's really kind of the first meetings. I don't remember when you all started. Sometimes it's a little bit of a lag. So the choice is, right, to get back on the calendar rotation, January 1st to December. So the chair serves in as a calendar year, or we kind of we have this like kind of mismatch now in terms of like not really corresponding to that. So the board can do whatever it chooses. There's nothing in the bylaws that requires a chair to serve in any particular capacity for a certain period.
Yeah, no, I definitely think it's reasonable to not switch over at the start of the year, given how late you were appointed. But I think it would be a good idea to sort of shift back towards the standard schedule over time, if possible. So, I mean, that's my 2 cents.
I think we can compromise like that. Maybe you can take over in March. The way I get 10 months, you get 10 months.
And then sort of the next year, maybe it's January or back to
Yep,
to
Okay.
December, and
Let's
then
do
we
that.
just shift it back.
that works.
Yeah.
All right, thank you guys. And the last item will be the council calendar preview. And I have a few notes here. I just realized you put here big like Heather read the meeting rules. And then I didn't notice.
Still listed.
Sorry, it took me a long day.
And highlight.
Yellow. It's highlighted too. It's like, okay. Sorry, guys. But yeah, it says here to talk about the Excel energy update and the greenhouse gas
Yeah.
inventory. So
Yeah, for our board members, I can take this one. Obviously, we do this look ahead of the council calendar. And I just wanted to flag a couple of things that I thought would be really important for you all to be tracking. And then also highlight some things that we want to make sure we get before you in the next quarter or so. So one big item that I just wanted to mention, and we'll need to figure out the best way to bring it to you, is we do have a facilities master plan and a Western City Campus Rec Center overview coming up on January 11th. There's also, we are now tentatively scheduled, hopefully we're locked in to the January 11th date. That's going to be actually a special meeting. We are going to be giving an update, or Excel will be giving an update to City Council on their emissions. So as part of the Excel partnership, they have requirements codified within the partnership agreement to hit certain emission reductions year over year between 2020 and 2030. Why that's relevant is they agreed to these year over year targets statewide, so it's not just for the city. And if they don't meet those targets, we have the ability to exercise what we call an off-ramp or an opt-out of that agreement. What we know is we have emissions information, or Excel has their emissions information for 2022, which was the first year that they are calculating based on kind of when they get their information and are exercising the opt-out. So they're going to be giving a presentation to city council, and we are talking about doing a broader update to council and the community on the partnership activities. Any projects that are noteworthy that we want to talk about. We have an advisory panel that steers a lot of that work. We're trying to figure out how to get that presentation to you all. Originally, the plan was to do this update in February, and we just had some scheduling issues with other public hearings, so we had to push that date to January 11th. So my intention was to bring that update to you in January, and I just wanted you to be aware that we're not going to be able to do that in advance, but I want to come back and have a deeper conversation with the board about the Excel partnership and everything that is kind of under that umbrella. I actually think it'll be a good conversation with you all. We can go a little bit more in depth, and we'll be able to in the hour that we have with council. That will really be focused on the emissions targets. What are we going to do about it? What's kind of the political implication of it? So that's really the piece that council will talk about, and then we'll have a deeper conversation with all of you. The other topic that I want to make sure we bring to you is one that's coming up here relatively soon. And just had some conversations with colleagues about what boards the civic area master plan, the update to the civic area master plan, and the redevelopment of civic area, which is this downtown area, Central Park, Band Shell, kind of over to where my office is and the atrium. So this whole area obviously is part of a redesign and an update and redevelopment, really driven by the remapping of the floodplain, driving, and then as we vacate some of these buildings in the next couple of years, what does it mean for this area? So really felt like that was an important topic for you all to weigh in on in terms of use, in terms of climate issues, sustainability, resilience, all of the environmental attributes that we need to be thinking about in this downtown area. So that'll be a topic that'll be coming to you as well. And I had an item kind of pinned to bring to you. In addition tonight, we were going to talk about what was Carolyn doing?
Landscaping?
Yeah, the gas powered landscaping equipment, next steps there before we go back to council, probably at the end of Q1 next year. We are set to release our inventories, our greenhouse gas inventories, probably early next week. And I say that plural because this is the first time we're going to be releasing 3 inventories. The first is our typical community-wide greenhouse gas inventory that measures, obviously, all of our emissions from the different sectors, scope 1 through 3. But we're also releasing our city municipality. So as a city, as an organization, we have our own targets internally, how we want to track those. And so we're going to be releasing that inventory as well. And then for the first time, we're also releasing our consumption-based inventory. This is work that we talked to the board about previously. So starting to really push upstream and understand emissions from services and goods that are coming into Boulder. So I want to kind of stay on that whole circularity theme. Typically, we measure at our borders. We talk about the things that we can measure within kind of the Boulder bubble. Though we do track in and out commuting, transportation related emissions. This is an opportunity to do, I think, more honest and accurate accounting of emissions that I think really help us drive the policy and programs that we want to get people from, as an example, having Amazon come to your house 3 times a day. And then the embodied carbon conversation. So it starts to really create a more comprehensive view of our emissions and the role that we can play in addressing those. So we're going to be releasing those 3 inventories. I'd hoped to bring that to you tonight to give you that overview. Our data analyst who you have met when he gave you the presentation, I think on the consumption-based inventory, Ben Katz-Moses, he's leaving the city at the end of next week. And we also had a lot of topics tonight, it just didn't fit. So I do want to bring that back to you in January. We can have a conversation about what the information means and what we're doing about it. So those are a couple of the big ones. I want to make sure, of course, tomorrow night, we'll be talking with council about, it's just on consent agenda, the small cell agreements for our streetlight acquisition. We have about 10 poles that have things attached to them. And so we have to modify our ordinance to be able to move that forward. Not anything that you are terribly interested in, but it's something my department is working on leading. And then the energy code, the second reading of updates to the energy code will be February 1st. Then we have a legislative update and a few other things that'll be moving forward. Oh, our noise ordinance and gas power, we call leaf blowers, but technically March 21st, is that when we're scheduled, I think? So we'll be coming back to you in Q1. That's another topic that we'll be bringing to you in Q1. All right, that was a lot. That raise any questions, concerns, red flags, anything? Cool.
You good? Then, yeah, the next meeting is scheduled for January 10th at 6 p.m. And with that, we can adjourn the meeting. So put a motion to adjourn the meeting. Anybody second?
I'll second that.
Yeah, thanks. We're done.
Thank you. 2 minutes to spare even.
Wow.